Learn not to judge. Deep within the mountains of Hida, where the breath of the wind was so pure it seemed to chant invisible mantras, there stood an ancient temple forgotten by maps but remembered by souls seeking peace. It was called Senshinji, the Temple of the Pure Heart. There lived a handful of monks, far from the clamor of the world, devoted to the study of Zen meditation, the observation of nature, and the silent teachings of everyday life. Among them was Ryo, a young apprentice who had arrived hoping to find clarity. He had traveled many days from the city, carrying in his heart a mixture of restlessness, pride, and a constant need to understand everything through categories. Good or bad, right or wrong, wise or ignorant. His mind was a wheel that never stopped turning, measuring, comparing, and above all, judging. That old man walks so slowly. How can he be considered a spiritual master? Why doesn't that monk bathe more often? The smell is unbearable. That statue isn't well carved. It doesn't express nobility. These thoughts slipped silently through his mind like shadows. He never spoke them aloud, but each one was like a stone thrown into the pond of his consciousness, sending ripples that clouded his vision. Mindfulness is not just being present, said Abbot Gensho one morning, sweeping the dry garden leaves. It is learning to observe without condemning, without labeling, without burdening each moment with our old ideas. Ryo listened, but he did not understand. One night, as the mist descended like a veil over the temple roofs and crickets sang their ancient song, the young monk approached the lotus pond. He looked at a solitary flower, still closed, covered in mud. Seemed weak, unpromising. It will never bloom, he thought, not like the others. And without knowing why, he felt proud of his good eye, as if seeing faults in others was a sign of wisdom. Just then, Abbot Gensho appeared silently behind him. What do you see there, Ryo? A weak flower. Surely it will die without blooming, master. Gensho smiled gently. He did not correct him. He simply sat beside him and gazed at the flower without saying a word. They remained silent for a long while, listening to the sounds of the forest, the soft whisper of water, and the distant call of an owl. Sometimes what seems small or crooked is exactly what takes the longest to show us its beauty, the abbot finally said. The mud in which this flower grows is not an obstacle. It is its origin. This is a Zen story about acceptance, about how judgment can become a barrier that keeps us from seeing the truth. Eastern wisdom teaches that what you judge outside, you deny inside. And only when we learn to look without wanting to classify, without wanting to control, do we begin to truly see. That night, Ryo could not sleep. Not because of worry, but because a seed had been planted within him. A different kind of doubt, silent and alive. A doubt that demanded no answers, only presence. The next day, Ryo woke earlier than usual. The cawing of crows echoed among the cedar trees, as if announcing the birth of a different kind of day. The mist still hugged the branches, and dew droplets hung from the ferns like tiny pearls of wisdom. During the silent breakfast in the dining hall, Ryo watched his companions with a different gaze. Not with fewer thoughts, but with more attention. The monk who ate with his left hand, the one who slurped too loudly, the one who seemed absent while chewing. Until now, each of them had been, in his mind, a category. A quick, precise, comfortable judgment. But that morning, something had changed. He remembered Master Gensho's words. Mud is not an obstacle. It is the origin. During the day, Ryo was assigned to work in the garden alongside Brother Tetsujin, an elderly monk many considered eccentric. He had a curious way of talking to the plants as if they were mischievous children, and sometimes he would stand still for minutes staring at a stone, as if waiting for it to tell him a secret. Ryo had judged him more than once as strange, even useless. That morning, As they pulled weeds together, Ryo broke the silence. "Brother Tetsujin, why do you talk to the plants?" Tetsujin didn't answer right away. He looked at his dirt-covered hands, raised them to the sun as if listening to something in the air, then smiled. "Because they don't speak to me with words, and I don't answer with ideas. We just share what we are, without judgment." Ryo remained silent. The wind blew gently and the plum leaves trembled as if they understood better than he what had just been said. "Don't you sometimes find it ridiculous?" Ryo pressed. "Of course," Tetsujin laughed. "But who am I to judge what seems ridiculous or not? Maybe the truly ridiculous thing is to believe everything must make sense just because I see it from my small shore." This was a deep spiritual teaching disguised as a simple moment. Judgment, Ryo understood, is like a wall we build in front of everything we don't understand. Protects us, yes, but it also isolates us. And that isolation disguises itself as wisdom when in reality it is fear. True mindfulness practice, Ryo thought, is not just breathing and sitting quietly, but observing how my mind reacts, how it defends itself, how it boxes everything it touches. That impulse to judge every moment. Where does it come from? What fear does it hide? That afternoon, as he washed his bowl in the river, he saw his reflection in the water. He didn't look so different from the others. His face was just as human, just as fragile. Deep down, wasn't he also a lotus growing in the mud? Wasn't his judgment a veil separating him from others? And from himself? That night, the young apprentice wrote in his practice journal, "Today I discovered that every time I judge, I close myself off. Every time I observe without judgment, something inside me opens." The silent pond seemed to nod under the moonlight. On the third day after his conversation with Tetsujin, Ryo was assigned to clean the main temple hall. It was a spacious room, made of ancient wood that creaked as if its planks told stories with every step. This was where dawn ceremonies were held, group meditations took place, and chants echoed until they dissolved into the trees. As he carefully swept the floor, his attention was drawn to an object on the side altar, a cracked ceramic bowl. It was not particularly beautiful. Its shape was slightly warped, and it bore a fracture that seemed to have been repaired with golden resin. Ryo frowned. How could something so imperfect hold a sacred place? Later, during lunch, he approached Master Gensho and couldn't help but comment, "Master, there's a bowl on the altar that looks broken. Wouldn't it be better to replace it with a new one?" The abbot set down his chopsticks, looked up calmly, and replied, "That bowl was broken by an apprentice many years ago. We restored it following the tradition of kintsugi, which honors scars instead of hiding them. That crack is now part of its beauty. Not despite it, but because of it." Ryo felt a slight shiver, not from the bowl itself, but from what that object seemed to silently tell him. "So, is it more valuable now?" "Neither more nor less," the master said. "Just more authentic. This is a Zen story about judgment and inner compassion." The young apprentice understood that his urge to change what didn't fit his standards was actually a form of fear. Fear of facing his own cracks. Fear of not being enough, right, or perfect. That was why he judged, because it was easier to condemn outside than to see inside. That afternoon, during Zazen meditation, Ryo noticed his thoughts were no longer so loud. Not because they disappeared, but because he no longer chased them with judgment. He no longer labeled them as good or bad, useful or useless. He simply let them pass by, like leaves floating on a river. The Buddhist teaching of non-duality became alive in his experience. What had once been ugly or useless could now be seen as part of the whole. The imperfect contained beauty. The incomplete was also complete. After meditation, he returned to the empty temple. He knelt before the altar and looked at the bowl again. He no longer saw it as a mistake or just a decorative object. He saw it as a mirror. Learning not to judge is not a moral act, he thought. It is an act of liberation. When we release judgment, we also release the burden we place on ourselves. And in that moment, for the first time since arriving at the temple, Rio smiled, not because of what he had understood, but because of what he no longer needed to understand. Night fell over Senshinji. The moon reflected on the temple tiles like a serene lamp, and the silence was so deep it seemed to be listening. The days began to pass at a slower rhythm for Rio, not because the work lessened, but because his gaze had grown wider, more patient. Judgment still appeared, like an old visitor unwilling to leave, but now he greeted it without inviting it to stay. One morning, returning from gathering firewood with 2 other monks, Rio encountered a figure sitting at the entrance of the stone path leading to the temple. It was an old man dressed in rags. His skin was sunburned, his beard tangled, and his expression fluctuated between weariness and serenity. He said nothing. He was simply there, holding an empty bowl in his hands. One of the monks murmured, "Another beggar looking for food without giving anything in return. We should tell the abbot." But Rio said nothing. Something about the man's posture, the way he held his bowl as if holding time itself, seemed familiar. Silently, he crouched down, took some rice from his basket, and placed it into the stranger's bowl. The man did not thank him with words. He only bowed his head and ate slowly, as if each grain carried the weight of a world. This is a spiritual story about silent observation without condemnation. In the past, Rio would have labeled him dirty, useless, a freeloader. But now, for a moment, he saw something beyond. A human being breathing, walking, existing just like him. Perhaps with a different story, different pains, but in the same river of impermanence. When Abbot Gensho arrived later, Rio recounted the encounter. "Did you judge him?" the master asked. "No, not this time. Or at least, I didn't hear it so loudly." The elder smiled. They walked together toward the lotus pond. The flower Rio had considered weak days ago was now beginning to open, just barely, as if the mud no longer held it back. "Sometimes we believe that helping another is giving," the abbot said, "but often the true gift is to see without judgment. Accepting the other without trying to fix them is a profound form of love. Mindfulness, Buddhist teaching, and presence without judgment. Judgment does not disappear completely," Rio understood, "but its power weakens when we stop feeding it." And that surrender, which at first seemed like a loss, became freedom. Each moment was now a door, an opportunity to see without interfering, to be without controlling, to live without reducing others to a label. That night, in the quiet of the dormitory, Rio wrote in his journal, "To not judge does not mean to not see. It means to see beyond the forms." And with that thought, he fell asleep as the wind whispered among the pines like a faceless teacher. At dawn the next day, the cuckoo's song seemed clearer, as if the very air had been purified by the experience of the day before. The temple breathed silence. Every corner seemed to be listening, not with ears, but with presence. Rio was called by Master Gensho to a small room beside the meditation dojo. There, the abbot was writing on rice paper, tracing kanji with a calmness that seemed to arise from the very center of the universe. He did not look up when Rio knelt silently. "Rio," he said finally, "do you know what the heaviest thing a monk can carry is?" The young apprentice thought. "The bowl? The travel bag? The sutra books?" "Judgment," the abbot answered before Rio could speak. A single judged word, a single condemned thought, and the heart fills with clouds. There is no heavier burden than that of one who believes they know who the other is. Ryo remained silent. He felt those words touch him, not as an external lesson, but as something he had already begun to sense within. "Yesterday, when you looked at the beggar," the abbot said gently, "you didn't just see him, you saw yourself without masks. Isn't that so?" Ryo nodded slowly. "To not judge doesn't mean to become blind," the master added. "It means to look with the eyes of the heart, without raising walls, without baring arms. It means seeing the other without projecting our own fears, wounds, and desires. This is a spiritual story to sleep and awaken at the same time." At that moment, Ryo remembered his father, his old calligraphy teacher, even a former friend from the city with whom he had broken ties over a trivial argument. One by one, he recognized them in his memory, and also the judgments he had placed on each of them: unfair, cold, proud, ignorant. And for the first time, he understood those judgments were not truth. They were unacknowledged pain. "What do I do with all this?" he asked softly. Gensho set down his brush, carefully wiped it, and answered, "The same as with the broken bowl. Don't hide it. Don't throw it away. Gold it with compassion. The cracks of the soul are not healed with correction, but with deep acceptance. Mindfulness is remembering with love what we have tried to forget with harshness." That day, Ryo neither worked nor studied. He walked. He climbed forest trails, crossed old wooden bridges, and sat by the stream. He didn't meditate or reflect. He simply was, and in that purposeless pause, he felt his inner self soften, like damp earth after the rain. Letting go of judgment is like releasing a rope that has been taut for years. It's not about stopping thought. It's about stopping the attack. And in that silent surrender, Ryo began to understand the secret language of the trees, the stones, the birds, and of his own peaceful mind. That night he wrote, "When I stop judging the world stops pushing me." The following week, Senshinji Temple received an unexpected visitor. It was a young wandering monk named Kaito, who asked to stay for a few days before continuing his pilgrimage south. He wore a tattered robe, his hair grew wild and unkempt, and his bowl had a hole in the bottom that he patched each day with leaves and resin. When he walked, he dragged his feet. When he spoke, he interrupted without realizing it. When he ate, the noises he made disturbed everyone. Ryo felt old thoughts return. Small judgments like soft but precise arrows. He doesn't respect the rules. He lacks discipline. He's not worthy of the path. That night, while helping Gensho prepare the fire for the hot bath, he couldn't contain his unease. "Master, why do we allow someone so careless to stay here?" The abbot didn't answer immediately. He took a bucket of water, poured it slowly over the hot stones, and watched the steam rise, dancing like a spirit without a body. "Ryo, if you saw a stone on the path, would you call it stupid?" "No, I suppose not. And if a river gently surrounded it for 100 years until it was worn down into a smooth pebble, then it would be beautiful, I suppose." Gensho nodded kindly. "Perhaps Kaito is not here to learn from us. Perhaps we are here to learn from him. The impatience he stirs in you is your true teacher." This is a Buddhist story about judgment as a mirror. Ryo understood that his discomfort with the visitor had little to do with Kaito himself. Rather, it was everything he tried to hide beneath the mask of the ideal monk. His own clumsiness, insecurity, forgetfulness, and fear of not being accepted. That night, during Zazen, his mind did not quiet, but neither did he struggle. He observed his thoughts as one observes smoke from afar. Inadequate, disorderly, noisy words that no longer carried poison, but fragility. Accepting another as they are without needing to fix or improve them is a way of healing oneself. Judgment disguises itself as correction, but often it is only a shadow of our own self-denial. The next day, Ryo volunteered to accompany Kaito to gather dry branches in the forest. They didn't speak much, but watching him bend down, laugh to himself, get lost among the bushes, and return with arms full of damp wood, Ryo felt something new, tenderness. Not for what Kaito was, but for what he had stopped demanding Kaito to be. Zen wisdom on judgment and acceptance. Returning to the temple, Ryo wrote in his journal, "It wasn't Kaito who bothered me. It was my resistance to loving the incomplete." And for the first time, his calligraphy trembled with beauty. The autumn wind began to blow colder that night. But inside the temple, the bath fire burned with a silent warmth, as if compassion itself had ignited its flame. A few days later, Kaito continued on his way without notice. At dawn, he left a small note at the temple entrance. "Thank you for the shelter, the rice, and the silence." He didn't sign it. He didn't ask for anything else. He left just as he had come, like a question that needed no answer. Autumn grew stronger. Leaves fell like silent prayers along the stone paths, and the sound of the river grew more present, as if it also flowed inside the temple walls. That day, Ryo walked alone along the path beside the stream. When he reached a bend, he sat on a moss-covered rock. He closed his eyes, not to meditate, but to not intervene. He no longer sought to improve, understand more, or achieve anything. He simply was there, part of the landscape. That's when he felt it. The river did not judge him. The wind did not correct him. The tree did not demand he sit up straight. Life in its purest state demanded nothing. This is a Zen story about the freedom of letting go of the inner voice that compares, classifies, evaluates, and condemns. Ryo understood that for years he had believed judgment was necessary to survive, to advance, to protect himself. But now he realized judgment was a chain, not a sword. It did not make him strong. It made him rigid. "Master," he said that very night, as they walked together under the starry sky, "I think I finally understand." Gensho did not reply. He only looked up at the sky. "What have you understood, Ryo?" "That judging is not seeing. It's closing your eyes and believing you've already seen." The abbot smiled. They stopped beside the pond. The lotus flowers were beginning to close for winter. "When you stop judging," he said, "you begin to allow. And when you allow, you begin to love." Zen meditation is not about sitting still, but about living without condemnation, observing every gesture, every thought, every emotion, even the uncomfortable ones, without trying to fix them right away, without turning life into a problem to solve. Ryo then realized judgment was a reflection of the ego still struggling to be right, to control, to understand everything. But the river never asks. It just flows. It just gives. Mindfulness as a way of loving without possessing, as a way of being without interfering. That night, as incense burned low in the zendo, Ryo wrote his simplest, truest thought. When judgment falls away, everything can be what it already is. And in that moment, he knew he needed no more proof. Only presence. Only gratitude. Only being. Months passed. Winter arrived with its cloak of silence, covering the temple's rooftops with a light dusting of snow. The pines creaked softly at dawn, and the steam from cooking rice floated like invisible incense through the halls. Everything slowed down, became more inward. Ryo was no longer the same young man who had arrived searching for answers. Not because he had found them all, but because he had stopped chasing them in desperation. One morning, while sweeping the temple's threshold, he noticed a white butterfly fluttering in a zigzag pattern, indifferent to the cold, indifferent to all logic. He followed its flight and saw it land on the frame of the old side door, the one no one used. Approaching, he noticed the wood was cracked, distorted by time, but still strong. He then remembered something Gensho used to say: "The true temple has no doors, because truth excludes no one. Only judgment does." This is the final teaching of the Zen story. Judgment closes doors that life tries to open. Every time we condemn, we distance ourselves. Every time we label, we reduce the world to what we already believe. But life, the real, sacred, present life, is always broader than our concepts. Spiritual practice is not about escaping the world, but seeing it without the need to fix everything. Ryo didn't stop having thoughts. They kept coming, but now he saw them coming and let them go. He neither embraced nor pushed them away. He simply let them pass, like clouds over an open sky. One day, while serving tea to a group of village children, one of them asked curiously, "What is the most important thing you've learned at the temple?" Ryo smiled and answered without thinking, "To not decide so quickly who I am or who you are." The children laughed without understanding. But the answer was not meant to be grasped by the mind. Eastern wisdom, Buddhist teaching, and mindfulness in practice. At sunset, Ryo returned to the pond. The lotus flower he once thought would never open was there, fully unfolded. At its center, a drop of water reflected the setting sun's light like a serene eye. He bowed silently, not to worship nor to ask, only to give thanks. For the stone, the broken bowl, the beggar, Kaito, every judgment he once believed true, and for having let them go. In his last written note of that winter, he wrote, "I no longer ask if things are right or wrong. I ask if I can see them without needing them to be different." And in that gesture, Ryo did not illuminate like the ancient stories say, but he rested, finally, deeply, without burdens, as if inside he had stopped pushing the world. That night, the temple seemed to breathe more calmly, and the snow fell so softly, even judgment fell asleep.